Today's episode has been brought to you by Schedulicity.
And also by the Pelvic Health Professionals membership. If you are interested in becoming a member, make sure you're on the wait list. There's an early invitation to join on December the 30th for everyone who is on the wait list. This is for massage therapists, yoga teachers, PTs, midwives, doulas, anyone who would like to learn about pelvic health for the people that they work with. Visit pelvichealthprofessionals.com for more information. And while you're there and while you're waiting for the doors to open at the end of December, check out our growing resources page. Anyone can view the articles, podcasts, and much more. Welcome to episode 146 of the Connected Yoga Teacher podcast. I'm your host, Shannon Crow, a mother of three, a yoga teacher, and a trainer and consultant working for yoga teachers. This podcast was created for you so that you can connect to information and inspiration every single week and feel supported as you navigate being a yoga teacher and also a business owner. In today's episode, I want to share an article that I came across some time ago, which talks about teaching inclusive, safe, and ethical yoga. As yoga teachers, we want our classrooms to be safe spaces that empower our students and maximize their choice. However, this is not always the case, sadly, partly because people sometimes come to classes wanting us to tell them what to do, and they trust that it's our job as yoga teachers to know better, and partly because some of our practices in yoga may erode empowerment, take away from agency, and undermine safety. This particular article got me thinking about how some common practices in modern yoga really fall short of what we want to achieve, whether it's because we're replicating inherited behaviors and practices from past generations, or we're adopting business practices meant for a more commercial context, or for some other reason. There are lots of reasons for this. This episode is in no way about shame and blame. I can see different things that I did as a newer yoga teacher, and I can look at some things now. And sometimes that work is uncomfortable. That's why I've invited the author of this article, Yonnie Fung, to share with us some of her insights on how we can empower our yoga students and increase their agency in our yoga classrooms. All of our show notes are ready for you at theconnectedyogateacher.com/146. There you can find the links that we talk about along with clickable timestamps. Oh, and also included in the show notes is a link to the article as well as the list that kind of sparked this article when Yonnie wrote it. I want to give a shout out of thanks first to Heidi Glass, who took the time to leave a voicemail. Now, some of you know that I love voicemail. I was just talking to someone this week who said, oh no, I don't like that at all. I really prefer to communicate via text. And that's fine. You can still always email. You can leave a review on our Facebook page. You can leave a review in iTunes. You can tell us in our Facebook group why you love the podcast. Heidi Glass left a message, and the way to do that is there's a button on the right-hand side of our website, and it says Leave Shannon a Voicemail. It allows you to leave a voicemail that's 90 seconds long. If you feel like you need to go over that, just make sure that you remember to leave a second one. So here's Heidi when she had just listened to the episode about teen yoga.
Shannon, my name is Heidi Glass, and I'm from Palmetto, Florida. I'm a high school teacher and also a yoga instructor for all the athletes at my school. I cannot tell you how excited I was when I heard that you were doing a podcast on teens, because I don't know anyone else that does what I do. So thank you so much for the information. I've been listening for about a week, and I just love your podcasts, and I have gotten so much out of them. So keep going. Awesome job. I love, love, love what you're doing. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Heidi. As I said, it means so much that you took the time to leave this voice message. It is so fun for me to hear our Connected Yoga Teacher listeners. So thank you for sharing that the podcast has really helped you. And I am for sure continuing to do this work. It really lights me up, and I love to share this. Let's dive in and meet Yonnie. So Yonnie Fung is the founder of Yoga with Yonnie, an award-winning yoga and movement space in Beijing that focuses on small classes, non-commercialism, integrity, and cultivating real human connections. She's a senior yoga teacher with more than 5,000 hours of teaching and training experience and a certified yoga therapist. Yonnie has advocated for introducing yoga therapy into medical contexts and integrating yoga practices to help patients who are recovering from injuries and chronic pain. She also pioneered the introduction of trauma-sensitive yoga classes in Beijing. Yonnie values a collaborative learning environment over an authoritative style and seeks to help students and clients in discovering what they need to feel well and whole. Yonnie recently relocated to Washington, D.C., where she continues her work for survivors of complex trauma and where she offers classes that involve movement, yoga, and nature. So let's dive in and meet Yonnie. Welcome to the Connected Yoga Teacher podcast, Yonnie. It's great to have you here today.
Thank you for inviting me, Shannon.
I am so curious to hear about how you wrote a list, which then translated into an article, and how this just sort of went viral in the yoga world. But before we get there, let's look at how you even got started with yoga. Where did that begin?
My grade 4 gymnastics teacher used to say, breathe with your stretch, and breathe as you move. And I think that was his way of saying coordinate breath with movement. And then during high school, I had a drama teacher who introduced basic meditation techniques like the body scan. And I used those throughout my life without really calling it yoga. I didn't have a name for it. It was when I was in China in my 30s, I found myself there studying Mandarin, and I was doing it 12 hours a day every day and preparing for language exams, and my body really hurt. I was constantly hunched over a computer listening to language tapes that they had back then. And, you know, to kind of help myself, I joined a gym and that had yoga. I found it really fun. It looked easy, but I found it very hard to hold, to balance, to move while still conscious of the breath. It was a real challenge, and I liked it, and so it stuck. And it was really when I started working in a law firm, which was a super high pressure environment. The pressure came externally. My colleagues were very smart in that sort of book smart way. They seemed impressive and impossibly accomplished. You know, the law breeds a kind of culture where human traits like forgetting to add a full stop here or there can feel like a really weighty problem, one that's bigger than it really is. And I'd been living in this pressure cooking environment with a tribe of people who all wore all-nighters in the office as a great badge of honor. And with that came a lot of pressure and internal pressure too. You know, I always felt like an imposter that would never measure up. And, you know, one day they would discover my secret. I'd be exposed. I was a fraud. So I would drive myself into a frenzy, a very productive frenzy that's great for employers, not so productive if you're a tender soul. And I went back to yoga, and at lunchtime I'd go to class wherever I could, and that movement really refreshed my body. But more, it helped me mentally hold it all together, and it kept me sane. So that was my beginning to yoga.
That's amazing. I love how you said that it sort of brought you back together. That's quite a description of it.
Yeah.
So then what made you decide to become a yoga teacher then?
Well, in 2008, the global financial crisis hit, and one day I rocked up to an office where 40% of the lawyers just evaporated without any explanation. Suddenly, the law firm was like this ghost town. There were no bodies in those chairs. And later that year, so basically what had happened was that a whole bunch of people just all got fired without any warning. And my husband, who was also working at the same law firm, he also lost his job later on that year. And so we decided to turn a very miserable event into a more liberating one. I decided to quit my job, and like a lot of bankers and lawyers, we bummed around South America that year. And when I took that time off, I suddenly had the space to imagine and to think about what it was in life that drove me. And it certainly wasn't writing the intricacies of intellectual property law in China that was driving me. Yoga spoke to me very strongly, and it didn't really make any sense at an intellectual level. Certainly not at a financial level. It didn't make any sense. It didn't make sense on any level, except it was just calling me, and I was drawn to it, and I wanted it to take a central position in my life. This feeling that I had, I didn't really want to let go of, and I wanted to understand it more, and I wanted to share it with others. So that was when I made the switch. I decided that I was never going to go back to any law firm, and I would train to be a yoga teacher and understand this thing more deeply.
And so how is that now playing out? Like where are you now located, and where are you teaching, and sort of what is the work that you do?
Oh, okay. There's been a lot of moving around. I'm currently living in Washington, D.C. I'm new here. I've only been here for 6 months. Never in my wildest dreams did I imagine I would be living in Trump's America, but here I am. I am sitting around waiting for my work visa to come through, which is a very, very slow process in this political environment. But before that, I ran a yoga studio in Beijing, and I did that for 8 or 9 years. It was a little place that I ran out of home, and I started off teaching Ashtanga, and then it became very clear to me that, contrary to what we were taught, not everybody can do Ashtanga. It's not suitable for everybody. I started sniffing around for something else to do, I wanted to learn how to tailor yoga to the body, as opposed to trying to squeeze everybody into an Ashtanga sequence. So I studied some anatomy with Simon Borg-Olivier in Australia. He's a physiotherapist there and a yoga teacher. But just understanding anatomy can only get you so far. And so I sniffed around for, in law school, there's like a Harvard, and you can just go to Harvard and you're going to get a quality education there. But there's no Harvard for yoga. But I had heard somebody had written on some yoga forum that the Krishnamacharya Yoga Mandaram was the Harvard of yoga. And so, I started sniffing around there, and I thought, follow lineage. You can't go wrong. The grandson of Krishnamacharya is there teaching yoga therapy, and that sounded very impressive to me at the time. And so I enrolled in Kaustubh Desikachar's yoga therapy program, but that fell apart very quickly. Kaustubh was my mentor. He knew a lot, and he was very entertaining and very charismatic, but he was also very touchy and feely, a bit too much for my comfort levels, and my gut instinct was that something wasn't right. It bothered me so much that I spoke with senior teachers about it. And eventually, when some European students spoke out about Carl Stubb being involved in some sexual manipulation, I withdrew from the program. And I found somebody else called Dr. NC, Dr. Chandrasekaran, and he was also based in Chennai. He ran the KYM's yoga therapy program for a long time, and I went and studied with him old school style. I went and did that for 3 years in Chennai, back and forth. So he's a medical doctor and a yoga therapist, and that combination of science with yoga was something that I felt like I really needed at the time. It appealed to me. It felt like sort of steadier ground to be standing on.
Was there any point in your yoga teacher training journey then, did you think, oh my gosh, I thought this was the Harvard of yoga. I went to this school and now was there any point where you just felt like I might give up on this?
Oh yeah. I gave up. I withdrew from the program. So I went down the KYM trail, enrolled in the yoga therapy program, which was sort of affiliated with it. It was run by Kaustubh Desikachar. When I went there and I spent a summer there studying the first module of that yoga therapy program, and things just didn't add up, and all of the red flags were going off for me.
Right.
And then and I felt uneasy. I got back to China, and then pretty much as soon as I got back from China, the news spread that this news had broken out that Carl Stubb was involved, and that women were standing out, like sort of coming out, and they were speaking out about how he had sexually manipulated them. And for me, it was pretty much a no-brainer. Like, I wasn't going to be studying with that. I'm not going to study with him. They were just, I didn't hesitate. What was very interesting and surprising and disappointing was how many people did stay.
Right.
And, and then the same old story will, we're all consenting adults. So who are we to judge? And, you can separate the teachings from the teacher, and all of this. None of it made any sense to me. And I felt for a long time very disillusioned and maybe betrayed.
Did you ever in that time feel like giving up on yoga as a whole?
Oh, at every junction.
Right.
So many times, so many times. But, I'm also a survivor. I'm not easily defeated. I thought, okay, so this does not represent all of yoga.
Right.
This does not, because that news would come later. that every major lineage would be embroiled in some sort of scandal. That news was to come later. At that point, I didn't know.
Right.
But no. So this episode with Carl Stubb was disappointing, but my will was not to be deterred. I did go and search for another teacher, and that's how I found Dr. NC, and he did not disappoint.
Was any of this in the back of your mind when you wrote this list? So I saw this list, and I know that you and I talked before we hit record here how this list has now evolved, but it was sort of like, here's my list of how we might be unintentionally harming our yoga students. And it's an amazing list. I'd love to include it in the show notes and I want to ask you, first of all, the first part of the question is, did any of this come from that experience with your yoga teacher training, or what really prompted you to start and to write this list out?
Oh, goodness. Okay, so there's many parts to that question. What prompted me? There wasn't one single incident. you could say that there were lots of little incidents, and it happened very steadily over a period of time that suddenly hit critical mass. Kind of like a drop of water here and a drop of water there, and suddenly the water is just spilling out of the bucket. So there was my personal experience with yoga teachers that I didn't personally experience it as at all empowering. It was also opening up my yoga, my computer every day, and being bombarded by ads for sexy, hot beach ab yoga or yoga for better mind-shattering orgasms, or ads for just one after the other for plastic yoga pants, or ads for, better essential oils for yoga, and ads for courses on, this, that, and the other. And it felt overwhelming. It wasn't just the one little thing. It was also my environment. It was watching how yoga studios could promise to make people yoga teachers in just a few weeks of weekend courses, whether or not they had any experience. You could come in with zero yoga experience and, hey presto, 9 weekends, you're a yoga teacher. It's hard to wear when you've spent so much time and so much effort in learning this craft and feeling like, I'm just touching the tip of the iceberg, and yet I'm a yoga teacher, they're a yoga teacher. How is the market ever going to differentiate this yoga teacher from that yoga teacher? And that it's an energy consuming thing to be thinking about. Didn't want to go there. But it was also seeing the abuses of, that we were just talking about. Abuses come to light in all major yoga lineages. Like, I was just speaking about Desikacha, but it's not just Desikacha. It was Bikram, Sashtanga, Patabi Joyce, Iyengar, Anusara. Matthew Remsky has a very long list of which is too long.
Mm-hmm. There was a great podcast as well. Oh, I forget the directors of this podcast or the producers or the creators of it, but it's the Yoga is Dead one, where it's like, did lineage kill yoga? And they kind of go through a long list.
Yeah.
And it's ruffling a lot of feathers right now. Like, you're right. There's these two sides, or not even two sides, many sides to it.
So many sides. And they force some very uncomfortable questions.
Yeah.
Yes, uncomfortable. They're very difficult.
And I feel like that's what your list maybe did. Do you think so?
Well, I think it perhaps contributed to the discussion in some little way.
Well, you said it went viral. Did you expect that? Like, did you?
Oh, no. I don't expect anything I say for anyone to ever really pay attention to anything I say. It's the last thing I ever expect. No, but it was encouraging to know that I wasn't alone, and that other people had these frustrations and concerns. And it was encouraging to know that there were so many yoga teachers out there who wanted to do better and wanted to create to shape the community in a positive way.
Mm-hmm.
So that was very heartening. This process has not always been a heartening process. If anything, much of what has happened in our industry, the fact that we can call it an industry, has felt very, and has been a process of disenchantment for me. Very slow. I didn't get into teaching yoga to hustle and to peddle my wares and to look, I invested so much time and effort and money and and heart and soul and belief into yoga, and to find that there are so many it felt like at every turn there was somebody who was betraying my trust and disappointing me, whether it be Patabi Joyce or it be Kaustubh Desika or and people who don't have these big names. Anyway, you started by asking me whether there was a single event, and I've given you a very long-winded answer to that. No, so the answer is no. There wasn't one single event that led to my writing this article. There was a confluence of lots of different things.
So when you sat down to write the list, I also want to know, was it something that you added to when you saw something or thought of something, or was it like, I'm just going to sit down in this one thing and think, here are all of the things that I really would like people to be aware of as yoga teachers?
Oh, when I sat down to write the list, it wasn't anything that I had crafted very deliberately. It basically came out in one sitting in about 90 minutes of writing. It just all came out. It was very cathartic.
Well, and I think that that's probably why it went viral. So let me just read a few things on this list. One of them, which is a pet peeve of mine, is offering advice on nutrition. So we see this a lot in the yoga world, like juicing, fasting, dieting, and when it's really out of our scope of practice, when it's not in our training. Now, there are some yoga teachers who also have a training in nutrition. And there's one here that another one was participating in power structures, where students believe that the right to practice certain yoga postures is one that belongs to a teacher. And that teacher has absolute authority over what you may or may not physically practice. So I would love to talk a little bit about this power dynamic, because my question is, like, how do I lead a class so that people are like, otherwise I might as well just show up and be like, do whatever you want. Like, and I've been to those classes. I've been to a class where someone's like, I'll play the music, you do your yoga. And it was a really nice class, but we were all experienced yoga teachers. So I don't want to say that this was a community class. It was one of the best classes I've had. It was a self-led practice, but that's not what people are showing up for. And in my experience, a lot of the time when I offer more freedom, you can try this or try this, some people get frustrated. So I feel like there's an element of people looking to be led or told what to do with their body. So do you want to speak to this? How do you see this power dynamic in a yoga class?
Well, I think yoga at its best is an empowering path. So we're practicing to be in rhythm with ourselves and to reclaim our own bodies and to get to know the internal landscapes of the layers of our being. That sounds easy, but that's really hard. It's really hard. I have a 4-year-old, and I, just sort of experiencing the world with my daughter and listening to the things that people will tell a 4-year-old girl. Show me your best smile. Show me your best smile. Show me your prettiest smile. Oh, don't be sad. Don't be sad. Be happy. So we're learning from a very, very young age to ignore what we're feeling. We're practicing disembodiment from a really young age. So asking people to practice to be in rhythm of, with ourselves can be an incredibly difficult thing. It can be a frustrating thing when we don't know what that is. But does that make that less important? No, I think that makes it still worthwhile. Yeah. People will feel frustrated, will feel lost, and I think that's okay. to feel that frustration and to feel that to be with that lostness. It's a practice, right? It's a practice, and it's, you know, yoga. It's empowering because, you know, we are the ones that get to help ourselves. You know, you've got somebody standing over you telling you what to do, then how are you helping yourself? So I see our roles as teachers as maybe to increase somebody's autonomy. We're not seeing people as, you know, students as people that need rescuing or helpless, or, you know, they're not children. And that's the promise of yoga. But I think it's very important to distinguish the promise of yoga and the potential from the actual delivery as it plays out. Like, it all turns on what kind of an atmosphere a teacher is creating in a classroom. So we can guide participants towards making choices about their own bodies. We can help somebody develop confidence. We can choose to guide students towards listening to their own sensations, to trusting their sensations and acting on those sensations to make good choices about what works for their body, and to ultimately develop that independence. But to say that there's the potential for that doesn't mean that always plays out in reality, because classrooms tip the balance of power in the teacher's favor. I mean, teachers inherently have more power. We are the ones that get to speak. We are the ones whose words carry weight. We're the ones who are assumed to be experts in the room. And the more of a following a teacher has, and the more connections they have in the industry, and the more well-known they are, the more power they have. And you contrast that to the student who has less of a voice. They are tacitly expected to just listen and to follow. And they're not in the room because they are experts. It can be very, very hard for a number of reasons to speak up to teachers. So, you know, I've found it personally a very illuminating process to reflect on my experience in the Ashtanga community when we're looking at power through this framework. So just personally, I come from a family history where physical and mental toughness got a lot of approval.
Right.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
You tolerate pain, good. And don't question your elders. And
Right.
and obey authority figures and do your homework.
Right.
These are all virtues. And so I took to Ashtanga like a duck to water, you know, with that sort of a background. Oh, the teacher gets to choose which postures I'm allowed to practice. They get to decide what to do with my body. Great. Oh, they get to decide what order I practice postures in, what time, whether to use props, which props I'm allowed to use, which way. They decide if my fingers are in the correct position in Warrior 2, you know. And
Right.
and I'm not allowed to ask why. Oh, perfect. You know. In fact, I'm not allowed to ask anything at all, because, as Patabi Joyce would say, yoga is 99% practice, 1% theory. So shut your mouth, right?
Right.
So I'm reminded of an experience that I had during my yoga teacher training. It was like, you know, a long time ago. There's this daily Mysore style Ashtanga practice going on. And I was practicing Kapotasana, which is a sort of quite a deep back bend. It was a very intense posture for me. I had to be very careful with it. If I flopped into it too fast, I would really suffer the consequences. But if I took my time and inched slowly into the posture, then I would be fine. More than fine, in fact. It felt expansive and invigorating in a very good way. But the convention of the Mysore room is that it's a silent practice, and we're all discouraged from any kind of talking. So this teacher would dart around the room and adjust this body and adjust that body, and with barely a pause. And he'd always come to me in Kapotasana. And I was always afraid that he'd move me too quickly and he'd injure my back. So what do? You're not supposed to say anything. But I would always remind him that I needed to be slow and I needed him to be careful. And I tried to say that as economically as possible, but I would say it. And the first time he said it, he would look mildly irritated. Then by midweek, then I got an eye roll. And then by Friday, he would just say, he said out loud, bearing in mind this is a silent room, he said out loud, "Stop talking in class. You are a consistent offender." You're a consistent offender. So I say to him, "So how am I supposed to remind you to be careful of my back?" And he said, your talking is ruining my efficiency in class. There's a lot of people, I'm very busy, and your talking delays my work. So my point is not to say that this guy is a shitty human being. That's not it at all. That the larger concern here is that this logic has become normal in so many classroom settings. This is, and there are wonderful Ashtanga teachers who have begun to change up this mentality. But this mentality took generations to create. And it can take a very long time to unweave. So, that awful and humiliating experience was a very powerful lesson for me in how not to make my students feel. It was also a very good example of an authoritarian sort of power structure in class. The teacher decides what you do with your body, and you're supposed to just take it. And there's no talking involved. Your autonomy, your input, your experience, they don't matter. They're inefficient. Implicitly, he's supposed to know my body better than I'm supposed to know my body. And, me advocating for myself was against the rules. I mean, I think his words said everything. It made me an offender, call the police.
That's wild. If you think about it, how could someone else know your body better? I think it's impossible.
Impossible.
But this is a common thread that happens over and over again, not just in yoga classes, also fitness classes, Pilates, any movement where there's a teacher. You're right that it happens over and over. And students will say to me, "Should I do this pose this way or this way?" And I'm like, which one feels better?
Right.
And they look a little annoyed. Why doesn't she know? It's
why didn't she just tell me? Doesn't she know her stuff? How's this supposed to feel? Tell me now.
Right. Connected yoga teachers, I'm popping in here for a minute so that we can hear our hot tip of the week from the team over at Schedulicity.
Hello, Connected Yoga teachers. This is Ren with the Schedulicity Hot Tip of the Week. Once you have an email and content strategy, Schedulicity makes it a breeze to commit and follow through. The client communications tool allows you to send email messages to your clients and use their Schedulicity booking history to filter them into groups. It's never been easier to target your emails and market directly to the people who are most interested in your content. Keep that personal touch without sacrificing your personal time.
Thank you so much, Schedulicity. Thank you for your amazing software that allows me to really keep my schedule organized. I use it every single day in my business, and I love it.
But I mean, related to that, yes, there's that. Remember, related to that, is that, I mean, how can a student move in sync with their own emotional and physical senses if somebody else is busy arranging your body parts without consulting you? And how is this empowering? So there's that empowering piece. How is that empowering for a student? It isn't. It totally I would argue it totally disturbs their sense of autonomy. When you're diminishing the value of their lived experience and their expertise of their bodies, that's disempowerment. And this is fundamental, especially when we're adding in the piece of trauma. It's accepted these days. I think it's quite uncontested these days. And when you're looking at statistics, that if you're going to be teaching a group of people, definitely someone in that room is going to have a trauma history. I don't think that's at all controversial to say that respecting the basic principle of empowerment is central to recovering from trauma. So, this scenario that I've described is, that, is that going to help someone from a trauma background at all? Or is it going to re-traumatize them?
Exactly.
Right? And it doesn't matter how good your intentions are. It doesn't matter how good your intentions are as a teacher. And that's another common sort of response that I get from people. Like, my intentions were pure, and people will feel that. No, people will not feel that. You can have all the best intentions in the world, but if you are not empowering them to make choices for themselves, you will have impeded their recovery. Right?
So what are some of the ways then that we can move away from disempowering our students and empowering them? Do you have some things, and just a reminder to all of our listeners, this isn't about putting shame on you if you think, oh gosh, I've done that.
Oh, yeah. No, please don't feel ashamed. I've committed every sin in the book. I've made every mistake. But I'm speaking from my own mistakes, which hopefully help you to avoid some mistakes.
So do you see some of those mistakes that you made, you learned from them, and now you teach in a different way, from disempowering to empowering?
That's a very good question. Thank you. Well, I think the most important thing is the simplest thing is to be more careful with language. So we can choose to maybe phrase our cues in ways that give choices and not simply tell somebody what to do. And that is what prescriptive language is. And I've written about prescriptive language, and people are often confused. Oh, I don't know what prescriptive language is. A prescriptive language is basically anything that might sound like an instruction or a direction or a command. So I'll give you a practical example. Like, I want you to raise your arm, or you're going to step your leg forward, or you're going to bend over for me. Yeah, so they don't really, these phrases subtly imply that the movement is for the teacher and not in service of the student themselves. And that can be problematic, because if we're talking about people who are sexual abuse survivors, for example, or if someone has experienced rape, or if they were molested as kids, or have been in any sort of life situation where their bodies were manipulated in the service of other people, then these prescriptive cues can conjure up some very triggering dynamics. And remember, I think it's very important to bear in mind that we're not talking about the outlier here. Remember the statistics on trauma, that there's always going to be someone in your room that this is going to be relevant to. But another reason why this prescriptive language is a problem is its implied choicelessness. It implies that the student has no choice. You're going to step your leg forward for me. Where's the choice in that?
Right.
And so if you're children that have been in abusive or neglectful homes, or women who have been in abusive relationships, or anyone that's been held hostage. In all of these scenarios, the common thread is that they feel like they have no choice. And the prescriptive cueing reenacts this choicelessness. And look, in scenarios where the survivors can't avert the abuse, they become habituated to this choiceless scenario.
Mm-hmm.
And over time, they can lose the neural ability to make these choices. So while invitational language, and that's the language of choice, that can help to reestablish this neural ability, that the prescriptive language will potentially entrench this neural disconnection, I suppose.
So instead of saying you're going to step your foot forward, what might we cue? Because we are constantly cueing in a yoga class.
Yeah, right. And so it's quite, well, I say simple, but hard to remember. Maybe begin a sentence with maybe. Perhaps step your right foot forward. Or perhaps, or if you like, step your right foot forward. Or if it works for you. Or if you're interested in folding forward. And those little simple changes totally change the dynamic, because now there's the potential for no, or there is space for me doing something different now. I don't have to. When I did my training with the trauma center, they would part of the training was that we would need to send in recorded sessions, recorded yoga classes of our cueing, and they would transcribe it. So you could see it all on paper. And our supervisors would underline every little word and be really on the lookout for where we would slip into prescriptive language. And I think most yoga teacher trainings will teach with this prescriptive language. So it's really not your fault. It's the way we were taught.
Yes, it's the way we were taught. It's the way we did classes. It's the way we were taught in school as well.
Exactly. And look, I spent 13 years in China. It's the way the government is. It's the way my parents were. It's the way my yoga teachers are. It's my whole educational history. So it takes, I think, and it's important to bear that in mind for any listeners who think, oh, I'm just hurting my students and I'm a screw up and I should quit. No, just understand that there are bigger forces at work that make us this way, and this conversation is really just to put it on the radar so we can start thinking about what the implications of this language might be and how we might be able to take small steps towards changing that.
And so do you ever hear the argument of, well, I want to say less words in a class. So all of this, wording will add more words to me just saying, step your right foot forward.
Yeah, it can be wordier, but I mean, what would you rather? Would you rather to be minimalist and have an authoritarian structure? Or would you rather give more choices, which will add to the number of words you use, but you're creating an atmosphere of choice and empowerment? So that's the equation. It boils down to that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, this is great. And it's so amazing how this can play out. Like, I was working with one man and said, and part of your practice, I'd like you to do intuitive movement. And he was like, I don't know what that means. Like, how do you want me to move?
Mm.
And that it was a big thing of he'd been told by so many personal trainers mainly, here's what you'll do, here's how many reps, here's what you'll, and I just wanted him to see, what does it feel like? Like, what does my body want? How do I want to move? So
Yeah, it does take some guiding too. So if we've been told all our lives how to move or how to be and just to follow commands, then it can be very difficult to learn how to listen to one's body. Yeah, and like actually this leads very nicely into a conversation about interoception. So I'll just explain a little, because, interoception is a big word, and I had to learn what this was too. So broadly, interoception is a sense of signals that originate from your own body. So it includes, for example, when we feel hungry, when we're thirsty, feelings of pain or stress or anxiety. Now, a lot of people, and particularly trauma survivors, can have experiences of compromised interoceptive capacity. So that means having a real hard time knowing what the body is trying to tell you. So children who have been in abusive environments, for example, will develop extraordinary abilities to scan their environment for warnings of attack. And they become geniuses at recognizing subtle changes to their external environment. And this comes at the cost of their ability to feel what's going on internally. So if you've learned time and time again that your needs are not going to be met, or that your needs are going to make someone angry, or you've been told time and time again that your needs are irrelevant and you've got a mask paper over your needs, then your interoceptive capacity can actually switch off. Kids that have been raised in neglectful homes who've habitually had their needs ignored will over time find that their needs will be, their ability to perceive their own needs will be weakened. And while in the short term that can help someone survive, in the long term it becomes, being unable to identify what your needs are and what your body's feeling can make life really challenging, right? So because how can you make good choices for yourself if you don't know what your needs are? How can you move in a yoga class in a way that feels good to you if you don't know how something feels? Yeah?
yeah.
But that's where, yoga and invitational cueing, or, stepping away from prescriptive cueing and giving choices to people, that's where this can be really, really important. So, yoga can actually help to reestablish these interoceptive capacities if participants are guided in such ways that encourage them to listen to their own bodies.
Can you think of an example of that in a yoga class, either that you have experienced or that you try and bring into your cueing?
Oh, yeah. Okay. So for example, if I'm raising my arm and I'm leaning out to the left, just a question. What do you notice here? Do you notice any sensation along the spine? Do you notice any sensation maybe at your waist, down the sides of your body? So we're not telling people what they're supposed to be feeling, and we're not telling people exactly in with too much precision exactly where they're supposed to be feeling it, but you're giving a general direction as to whether or not maybe they might feel something there. So people have a map for where basically they might be looking. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
This can also bring up frustration with students.
oh yeah.
Where
Yeah.
they're like, where should I be feeling this?
We get that all the time. And yes, and I really hear you. Like, you know, you were saying before, people asking you, where should I be feeling? You saying, I don't know, where do you feel it?
Mm-hmm.
People do. And I think it's because we've been educated to think in such ways that the expert can be the total, utter expert of you. Yeah. And and I don't think we are hearing enough messages in our classes or in our environment that we are actually experts of ourselves, that we are the only ones that have, you know, however many decades of living experience of our own bodies. We are the only people in the universe that has access to that sort of information. So we have expertise. It's just not expertise that you get at a university. It's not anything that you can get in a training course and there's no certification for it. But you are the expert. And so, I think our job is to remind people that they are also experts, and that they actually have, you know, this is not the experience of a yoga class is not all about, it's not 100% responsibility of the teacher. This is a partnership, that I guide you in particular ways, and you take that guiding and you do something with it that works for you. But that takes effort. It takes effort. It takes curiosity. It takes some willingness. It demands something of us. And it's a hard thing to kind of communicate to people, because there are very, very few spaces in life where that is the message. You know, that not so many spaces where work is truly collaborative.
Right. That's so true.
Yeah.
And I think there's a freedom as a teacher to know your students are the expert of their own body. So that doesn't, like, you don't have to have all of the answers for them. You don't need to know every anatomical piece of their body. If I could sum it up, I'm hearing that if I invite them to move, if I use more invitational language, if I ask them, where are you feeling that? If I ask them more questions, then I'm empowering my students. And also maybe even saying, wow, I would love this if our Connected Yoga Teacher listeners will say, well, I'm just going to start the class saying the intention for this class today is to know that we're all the expert in our own body. I'd like you to move that way today. And listen to how I just said that, because now I'm really super aware of this. I'd like you to.
or if you like.
If you'd like to. Yeah.
If you'd like to try this. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. It takes a lot of the load. I mean, it takes a lot of the pressure off the teacher. Look, the bar is set so high that it's impossible to reach anyway.
Right.
It's actually an illusion. It's a lie that we can actually know somebody else's body so thoroughly. I mean, you know, aside from the anatomy, well, how about, because there's an emotional component and a historical component. There's the component of their nervous systems. There's so many pieces that make up that are all contributing to the picture of how you're going to experience a movement. It just doesn't boil just down to anatomy. You can be an expert on anatomy and biomechanics and whatever emerging fields there are these days, and still not know what somebody is feeling in their body, just because you don't have their experience. And all of those experiences are going to bear on what the outcome or their experience or the sensations that they perceive in movement.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you might have a general guess, but I mean, I've had students in class where, you might, okay, so for example, so doing a forward fold, say, a forward fold. Forward fold, typically you might, from an anatomical, perspective, expect that might trigger some experience or some sort of sensation in the hamstrings, yeah? Just to kind of keep it simple.
Mm-hmm.
Someone came in class one day and didn't feel that in their hamstrings. They felt in their left ear. Every time they bent over, not the hamstrings, always the ear. Explain that. I don't know.
I'm always like, isn't that amazing? Oh my goodness. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, having the questions, having the question is so much more valuable than having the answers all the time. The answers are just easy ways to shorten the lifespan of the inquiry, right?
Wow, I just have to say I love that. I want to highlight that. Like having the questions is more valuable than having the answers. I feel like let's just get that in a big, like if you want to put something on your yoga studio wall that says like breathe, relax or whatever, having the questions is more valuable than having the answers.
Yeah. Yeah, the questions are so much more interesting. I mean, you give someone the answer, it's the end. It's the end of the inquiry. It's the end of the road. There's no more. But for every answer you give, there's the possibility of 100 different more answers.
Mm-hmm.
Which answer do you give? It's just so much. It's so much more fruitful to have the question, isn't it?
It is.
Yeah.
So you wrote this list. It became an article, which now a lot of yoga teachers, you were telling me that there are some yoga teachers who are saying this is required reading as part of our yoga teacher training, which I love that. And I think you said, if I got this right, that there are 2 more parts of this coming at some point. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. Yes, when get off my butt. Yes. So yes, there. In fact, I think part two and 3 might be coming out this week. So that's coming out on the I think Network Yoga Therapy website. But yeah, once it comes out, I'll be sure to alert you, Shannon.
Yeah, and I will be sure to put them in the show notes. And what I love is that you also went through a process with this. Like, I feel like you took this list and then you thought, how can I empower yoga teachers? And then the article came out of that. So I just really appreciate you taking the time to do this and you sharing like your thoughts on this and opening up the conversation in a lot of places.
Thank you. It was, it was born out of anxiety, actually. It was born of anxiety, and I felt that rather than sit with the anxiety, it was just far more productive to do something. And in my case, the one thing I could do was to write, to explain, and to get it out there. I'm not selling it. I have no wares to peddle to anybody. But yeah, it makes me feel better to know that that our community is evolving, that we're all doing a little better.
I like that. I really like to think of that we are, as a community, as a collective, evolving together, and that there is so much room for us to open up conversations like this in a way that says, here we are together.
Yeah.
And how can we make this experience to like better for our students?
Yeah. To have, exactly. To have the questions and to imagine, to imagine solutions collectively. I definitely don't have all the answers. I've only got proposals, and they're very tentative, and I'm very open to being proven wrong, or maybe I didn't phrase that quite right, but there are shortcomings in what I'm writing, but it's important to have the conversation because, and for others to contribute to this discussion to drive it forward so that we can have a collective of minds to take us to a better place.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That'd be great. I would love to hear more from our listeners in the show notes or in our Facebook group. It'd be really fantastic to keep the conversation going. So thank you for opening that up. Thank you so much for your time today. If people want to reach out and find out more about the work that you're doing, how do they do that?
Well, they could go to my website. I'm yogawithyonnie.com. I'm infrequently active on Facebook. I'm going through a bit of a hiatus right now, but I will frequently post videos of movement practices that break out of our standard inhale, arms up, exhale, fall forward, inhale, Yeah, so I have got movement videos online as well.
Okay, that's fantastic. We'll make sure to link to those in the show notes. So thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you, Shannon. Thank you. I really appreciate your time.
Connected yoga teachers, I want to hear from you. What was your key takeaway as we listened to Yonnie and we talked about how we can empower our yoga students? I would love to hear some of the techniques that you have learned to empower your yoga students, or some of the times where you didn't feel empowered as a yoga student, or maybe some of the lessons you learned. As you heard, even while I was talking to Yonnie, it was really something that I see that I'm working on with my language. So as we were talking through that, I was picking up and my brain was starting to process it. I want you to really be gentle with yourself as you're processing and learning new things. It's like learning handstand. You don't just pop up into handstand. You learn the little steps to get there. If you are wanting to hang out in person in 2020, I have 2 trainings that I will be leading and 1 training that I will be at. So the Yoga for Pelvic Health training dates are on our website. If you go to theconnectedyogateacher.com and look under trainings and events. Also, Rena is flying in and teaching Mama Nurture in Meaford, Ontario, May and June of 2020, and I will for sure be there. I will be there to teach the pelvic health portion of things, and I want to be there to see the new Mama Nurture grads. I'm so excited that Rena is flying in. She has a lot of experience. She also has a lot of yoga therapy background and a lot of experience teaching yoga teachers. It's going to be an amazing training. And if you can't make it in person and you would rather hang out with me online, there are 2 ways that you can do that. You can book a one-on-one consultation call with me, or if you're interested in learning about pelvic health, join our Pelvic Health Professionals membership. Get on the wait list, as I said, to get that early invitation to join. That early invitation is going out at the end of this month if you're listening in real time. So to find out more about that, go to pelvichealthprofessionals.com. Thank you so much to our team for making today's episode possible, also for helping with the Facebook group, our Facebook page, all kinds of behind-the-scenes stuff. Thank you, Suzanne, Crunch, Cindy, and a new member to our team, Nick. And the biggest thank you to you, dear listener. Really, without you, this podcast wouldn't be possible. And I'm just honored that I get to share interviews with guests, my opinion, my thoughts on teaching yoga. It is really humbling to think that it is helping yoga teachers around the world. And sometimes I feel like I have to pinch myself and remember, like, wow, I am so lucky that this is part of the work that I do. So thank you for making that possible. Alrighty, connected yoga teachers, it is time for me to sign off this week. But before I go, I want to know what you will be doing to stay connected to yourself, to your yoga practice, and to your community so that you can share the yoga that lights you up.